The bitter row over mining tax and a coalition get tough policy over asylum seekers have dominated federal parliament this week. Joining us to debate these and other issues are Housing Minister Tanya Plibersek in Sydney and Shadow Communications Minister Tony Smith, who is in Canberra. Thank you both for joining us. How are you both today?
Morning. Oh, terrific. How about you?
Good, very well, thank you.
Good. And yourself?
Very well. First to you, Mr Smith. The opposition's policy on asylum seekers is pretty much a return to the Pacific solution, that's how it's being hailed, and temporary protection visas. You'd be forgiven for thinking that John Howard is still running the coalition.
Well, look, the point we've made is that when we're in government, we stop the boats. And when we're in government again, we'll stop them again. Now, what's happened here over the last 2 years is very clear. The figures tell the story. Kevin Rudd took a policy that was working and broke it. And now we've had 128 boats, 6,000 people, and he's lost control of our borders. When we're back in government, we'll take control of our borders. We'll use the policy platform that we know has worked in the past, and it'll work again. Labor's plan is to keep doing nothing. Their plan is for continued border protection failure.
Well, on that, Tanya, if I can just ask you, your government has obviously reversed a lot of its reform on asylum seekers. We've seen a lot more asylum seekers reaching our shores. Are you both now just engaged in a race to see who appears toughest on boat people?
Well, let's just take what Tony said. He said that they stopped the boats. In fact, there were 242 boats during the time of the Howard government with 13,000 asylum seekers. And just take one example. They've said they've gone back to temporary protection visas. After they introduced temporary protection visas, in the following 2 years, there were 8,500 people who went onto these temporary protection visas, and 90% of them are still in Australia today. So I think they're interested in talking tough, but the practical changes that we've made make a more substantial difference to any of the back to the Howard era policies that we've heard over the last couple of days from the opposition.
Well, Ms Plibersek, we might now move on to the mining tax. Do you think the government is willing to compromise on the resources super profit tax, that so much so that the miners will be happy? Because the small concessions that we've been speaking about, the changing of the threshold in the last few days, has not been received well by the miners.
Oh, well, you got to ask yourself about some of these people. OK, you've got Andrew Forrest out there, who's gone from a personal fortune of $2 billion. $2 billion to $4 billion in a year. He's number 3 on Australia's rich list. Number 2 on Australia's rich list is another miner, another fortune of over $4 billion, and they're complaining about paying a slightly bigger share of tax. Now, these resources, these minerals,
you're attacking these people personally.
Tony, please let me finish.
You're attacking these people personally who employ thousands of Australians.
Tony, let me finish, please. These resources, you can only dig them up once. They belong to every Australian. These minerals, these things that are in the ground, you dig them up once, they're gone. We sell them overseas. We want a fair return for these resources. They are 100% owned by every Australian, and every Australian deserves to benefit, and they're going to benefit through increased superannuation in their own accounts. They're going to benefit from a reduction in the company tax rate from 30% to 28%, and they're going to benefit by massive investment in the infrastructure that actually keeps the mining sector going. I mean, it's expensive to build roads and rail and port, all of the things that the mining sector relies on, and we're saying that we will use the tax receipts from this new tax to pay for extra super for every Australian, for company tax cuts for every Australian company, and for the infrastructure that we all need to keep the Australian economy strong. And you've got to remember, we own these resources.
Hey, Tony, your response to that?
Well, look, Tanya's response illustrates two things. I mean, her personal attack on mining leaders really lets the cat out of the bag. I mean, this is all about Labor Party payback for people that criticise them. You cannot, in Australia, as a company leader, criticise this government without some form of payback, and we've seen some more this morning. The fact is, the mining industry plays a critical role in our economy. This announcement has been a disaster. It's a window into the Rudd government's policy failures on so many levels, but the point is, this will damage our mining sector, damage the economy, and the price is paid by all Australians. Now, Tanya's the housing minister. I mean, all of the things that go into building a house, those prices rise as a result of increased taxes and an increased cost base. We've got a ridiculous situation where Tanya and her colleagues are trying to say if they increase tax on the mining sector, that will be good for the mining sector and create more investment. But if they increase taxes on alco-pops and cigarettes, that leads to an opposite effect. They can't have it both ways. This is a damaging tax. They spent 4 months conceiving this disaster, and the mining leaders who are speaking out about the cost to jobs, the cost to Australia's economy and its competitiveness.
Look, you just talk about housing for a minute there. Every builder, every tradesperson that pays a company tax rate now will go from 30% to 28%. They'll be able to claim deductions on investments up to $5,000 straight up. They won't have to depreciate new assets over time. This is a great deal for them, and it's a great deal for all of their workers who'll see increased superannuation because of the money we're putting in. Now, someone who's 30 years old now can expect an extra $108,000 in their superannuation.
Is separate. The superannuation is separate.
It's not separate, Tony, because we cannot fund it without this new tax. We cannot fund it without this new tax. Money doesn't grow on trees. We need to introduce this tax to reduce the company tax rate, to pay for increased super for working Australians, and to pay for the investment in roads and rail and ports and all of the other infrastructure that our mining industry needs.
Look, the problem is no one in the Rudd government will listen to logic on this. Whenever a mining executive puts forward a point of view, they're attacked. Wayne Swan attacked them this week, you've attacked them again today. But it's not just the mining industry leaders, it's respected economists across the board have made the point that this will be very damaging for Australia.
The fact that after 2 weeks... is true, Tony. Exactly the opposite is true. We had 20 respected economists come out yesterday and say that this is a very important tax for Australia's economy. We've had... And I'll tell you something else. This is not about attacking mining executives. This is about saying...
Well, you just did at the start of the program. You
Tony,
attacked someone's personal wealth.
It is no surprise that people who are being asked to pay a little bit more tax jack up about it.
A little bit more.
They're asked to pay a little bit more tax. They pay their fair share based on the fact that these resources belong to every Australian, and we can only dig them up once. We can only export them once.
And how much is the little bit more? How much is the little bit more?
If we don't get the full value of them when we dig them up and export them, then those resources are lost to Australians forever. We're asking big mining companies to pay a little bit more tax, and they're complaining about it. There's no surprise there. But we are interested in governing for the national interests, and we know that you can dig these resources up once, you can export them once, and if we don't get the full value of those resources, they're lost to us forever.
Tanya and Tony, I'm sure that this rigorous debate could go on for many more minutes, hours, if not into the future. Thank you both very much for your time today, both Tanya Plibersek and Tony Smith.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
You too.